But look, we got a trunk, so it's all worth it.
So 2 trunks in 2 days is a personal record, I'd say. This unexpected and yet completely exciting turn of events has me super excited.
Hello friends, and welcome back. I'm Shannon Makes, enthusiastic crafter by day, circus artist by night, and in today's video, we're going to be digging up some previously unseen footage of a very fun summertime project involving some trunk restoration. Long story short, I found an amazing trunk for free in my local Buy Nothing group, and it looked like the perfect place to store some of my fabric, so I messaged the woman giving it away and then rushed on over without even waiting for her response. Also, if you're a monthly supporter, you have some supplemental bonus material for this make, so be sure to head on over to Patreon or Ko-fi to check it out.
So I may officially be the worst YouTuber ever because I have exactly 0 footage of me driving up and picking the trunk up. But look, we got a trunk, so it's all worth it. She is absolutely lovely. She's in pretty good shape. She has some super cool and unique features on the corners that I haven't seen very often in these trunks. So let's go home and let's take a closer look at this trunk and see what all work lies ahead of us. But look, we got a trunk.
So upon closer inspection, most of the trunk was in pretty good shape. The paint job, especially on what had become the top surface, was pretty scratched and scraped, and there were definitely spots of rust all over, but the structure of the trunk wasn't really compromised in any way. The hardware was in decent shape, much better shape actually than the leather handles, which were both completely gone. The inside of the trunk was pretty similar, in decent shape, but couldn't be mistaken for brand new. It still had its original tray, all covered in the same decorative lining paper as the rest of the trunk, although the lid of that tray was in pretty rough shape, as you can see here. The paper was flaking off in spots, it had lost its lid stay years ago, and some of the nails were starting to come loose, but after several decades, I'm honestly surprised there's any paper left at all. So I decided to start with a copper brush and try and get as much of the rust off as I could without causing any further damage.
Rexy!
Now, the longer I worked with this trunk, the more something became pretty clear.
Alright friends, so while I am super excited about this new addition to my collection in the form of a centuries-old trunk, I also feel like I'm in a little bit of a dilemma. Let me explain. I love a good before-after reveal as much as the next person. I do have a YouTube channel after all, and making things over and renovations and flips is kind of my thing. But in this case, I am also feeling a very strong pull to honor the history behind this object. And it's strange because it's not kind of in good enough shape to preserve as is, but it's not damaged enough to justify completely scraping out the paper lining on the inside and totally redoing a paint job on the outside. The paper lining inside is mostly intact. However, if you touch it or handle it too much, it does flake off very easily. It almost disintegrates. It is quite old. As for the outside, where there is paint, it's in pretty good shape and you can still very clearly see the original color and design with the stripes. However, it also has massive spots of very heavy rust, and I'm afraid that in trying to remove that rust, I'll damage the paint job surrounding it. So I don't know what to do. I shouldn't use the trunk as is because putting anything in it would probably scrap that inner lining. And if I don't do anything to the outside, the rust will continue to worsen and eventually it will get to the point that the paint job will be unrecognizable and the only thing to do would be to start from scratch. So I'll write the trunk experts, I'll do some more research online, and I'll give it a good think and see what I come up with. Who knows, maybe there'll be some amazing creative solution out out there that will be the answer to all of my problems. And if not, well, you guys just have to tune in to see what it is that I decide to do.
So I wrote an email to the trunk experts over at Bretton's Village. They have an amazing website with tons of tips and tricks on restoring old trunks. They have an online store where you can buy parts, and I really vibed not only with their humor, seriously, their blog is actually hilarious, but also with their approach of gentle restoration as opposed to taking antiques and making them look shiny and brand new. So I sent them some photos, asked them about potential origins of my trunk, their best guess on how old it was, and how they recommend I restore it. And while I waited for the reply, this happened.
Oh, what have I done?
Don't worry about it, is what you're gonna say.
I'll just put it in the basement with the other one. Don't ask questions.
Exactly.
It was only $5.
I seem to somehow have acquired a second trunk. So 2 trunks in 2 days is a personal record, I'd say. Sometimes life just hands you a $5 trunk at a garage sale and you just can't say no. So let's take a look at what this puppy looks like.
Honestly, this trunk seemed to also be in pretty good shape, aside from the bubblegum colored paint scheme. Most of the hardware looked original, although somebody had clearly replaced the handles more recently, maybe at the same time that they decided to paint all of the metal this fake tacky gold. The latches were my favorite part. They were this gorgeous detail, and they still pretty much worked. The inside was in much rougher shape, however, all of the paper was flaking, but that gorgeous middle motif was still intact and in pretty good shape. Now, I've been walking you through how I made one of my creative endeavors, and you know what has helped me tremendously on this type of project? Skillshare, which is this week's sponsor. Their courses on color grading were absolutely invaluable to helping me edit my way through this really wonky footage shot years ago on my iPhone. Specifically, I've been leaning a lot on Fred Trevino's video, Tips from a Pro Colorist. Now, I'm sure this isn't the first time you've heard about Skillshare, the online learning community that is full of amazing classes led by industry experts to help you expand your horizons. Whether you're a content creator looking to up their game, or you're interested in fiber arts, creative writing, graphic design, productivity, and more, Skillshare will certainly have a class for you. You can test the waters of a new skill with their introductory level classes, or you can become an expert by following one of their learning paths, which leads you through a curated sequence of classes designed to help you master a specific skill. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so make the most of your summer by diving deep into that skill you've always wanted to try and turn your I want tos into I made it happens. And thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this portion of the video.
Alright folks, this unexpected and yet completely exciting turn of events has me super excited because one day ago, I did not own any trunks, and yet it's 24 hours and $5 later, I am the proud owner of 2 trunks. That was very unexpected, but I am also thrilled because I feel like it kind of gets me out of that quandary I was talking about yesterday, because this trunk is the perfect candidate for a complete overhaul, restoration, before, after, flip-flop, whatever you want to call it. That's happening to this trunk. The previous owners clearly did not have the same mental shenanigans going on that I did regarding the history of this trunk, hence the bubblegum pink. And I am now completely free without any guilt to go ahead and do a restoration of this trunk, try to bring it back to closer to its original state. It leaves me a little more leeway to sort of respect the history behind the first trunk. Let's go get started.
Now here I'm using Citrus Strip, the least toxic of the paint strippers, and I was working outside and trying to use gloves as much as I could tolerate in the summer heat, but I would still recommend using a bit more PPE. I'm pretty sure this paint job is quite recent and doesn't have any lead, but also I didn't test it, so I probably should have been more careful. After a few emails back and forth with Bretton's Village, I decided the plan would be to clean the metal, take off any big clumps of rust, and then protect the whole thing from further damage and oxidation with a mixture of tung oil and mineral spirits. And that pretty much took care of the outside of the trunk, but what about the inside? I wanted to be able to use the trunk to store fabric, but I couldn't really put anything in it right now without further damaging the paper lining. It was time to think outside the trunk, as it were, and I came up with what I think was a really creative solution that both honored and preserved the history of the trunk while still allowing me to use it guilt-free. I'll reveal that solution a bit later in the video, but for now, let's check back in with our pirate trunk. It took me absolutely forever and a wide variety of brushes, scrapers, and blades to get all the paint out of the crevices and grooves of the wood, the tin, and the hardware, but finally I was starting to see less bubblegum and more bottle of rum. The tool that really took it to the next level though was the wire brush attachment on the Dremel. Now I don't own a Dremel, but I was able to borrow one through the same Buy Nothing group where I got the trunk, so all I had to do was buy a packet of wire brushes, and let me tell you, this really did the job. It wasn't too abrasive, and it was perfect for getting into all the little nooks and crannies like under the wood slats where years of paint had piled up. Again, PPE is very important here. Be sure to wear a mask because you do not want to be breathing in all of this paint dust. Sometimes, to give the Dremel a little break, I'd take the brushes and put them in my drill, and that worked pretty well too.
We now have exactly 3 days in which to wrap up both of these projects before I leave the country, so hopefully, fingers crossed, all goes well. I'm not sure I'll be able to get them 100% done, but I should at least be able to get them preserved and in a position where I can safely store things in them while I'm out of the country, and they shouldn't deteriorate any further, at least. The outside of both of these are looking fantastic, and it is now time to tackle the inside, and for that I have got some handy dandy water. It is recommended that you just use some simple water to spray down the inside lining of these trunks because the adhesive that's holding the lining on is usually fairly simple and also very old and should come off fairly easy if you just spray it down. So the trick here I think is going to be to soak the paper but not waterlog the wood because of course that would be detrimental to the actual chest. So let's give the inside a spray down and hope that the paper comes off fairly easily because I don't have time to waste on this. All right, so I've gotten the bottom part entirely scraped free of all that lining and it went super well. And now comes the finicky part. Now it's time to tackle the top part of the chest, and this is the part that I am quite worried about because ideally, of course, I would like to try and preserve both of those decorative images, the one in the center here as well as the sort of decorative red and white border, but that's going to be really touchy. I don't know if it's going to be possible, and worst come to worst, I do have photos of both of the decorative elements that I can use to reproduce them if I need to, if I just cannot get the lining off without destroying them. So let's give it a shot.
So my method for preserving the lid was pretty simple. First, I used a ruler and an X-Acto blade to score the edges of the paper that I wanted to preserve. Then I took a stiff piece of cardstock and used that to shield the decorative elements from getting wet while I carefully scraped down the brown paper. I let that soak in for a few seconds, then I took the scraper and carefully removed the brown paper as close to the designs as I felt comfortable doing. This worked really well and left a very clean, crisp edge, so I used the same technique on the rest of the border design, and having a flexible ruler was definitely useful here because I could just press it into the curve of the lid, although there were definitely certain spots where I just freehanded it, especially those tight corners. I kept using my spray bottle and cardstock to wet down the brown paper while protecting the border, and the technique I found worked really well, especially in those tight spots, was to wet the paper towel directly and just dab it onto the brown lining. I also found that using the edge of a putty knife worked really well to protect the border and prevent it from being accidentally lifted up in the process.
All right, so we are done and it looks fantastic. Guys, my plan worked better than I could possibly have hoped for, and I'm honestly thrilled and mildly shocked. So the next step here is going to be giving a light sanding to all of the interior, again trying not to mess up the decals, and then I'll go over with some Mod Podge and just touch up all of the paper images that are left intact, because that should help hold them together and stabilize them. I do not want to coat the entire interior with Mod Podge or a polyurethane or anything like that, because I do want to make sure that the wood can breathe. I think that's going to help its longevity. And then it's going to be ready for a coat or two of some tung oil, and that should really bring out the wood grain, highlight this gorgeous rustic look that we've got going on here, and I am super excited to see it start coming together. There is inevitably a stage in every project in which it looks horrible and you panic and you think, what have I done now? I've made a huge mistake. And that would probably be this step for me, because when the glue was wet, it was looking very milky and white, and I wasn't entirely sure how it was going to dry. But now that it is dry, it is completely translucent. You can see a little bit where the Mod Podge covers spills out onto the wood, but I think that is going to completely disappear in the next step, which is going to be adding some tung oil finish to protect this wood in the future. So once I have that on, pretty sure everything's going to blend all in. It's completely prepped, it has been sanded, it's got its Mod Podge, it's been vacuumed out so there's no sawdust left in there, so let's get painting.
Now, the Breton's website assured me that I can apply this tung oil on top of, and I quote, wood, metal, leather, paper, or any other material found on your trunk, so that's exactly what I did. While I had the tung oil out, I also went over all the exposed metal bits on the first trunk. Now, I was in a bit of a race against the clock here, so I didn't film much, but you get the idea, so let's hop on over to the other trunk to see what my creative solution for the interior was. And as a reminder, this is what it looked like before. So if you couldn't tell, what I ended up doing was I photographed the motif from the original paper lining, and then I carefully dragged it into Photoshop and tweaked it to make sure that it was a perfect repeat pattern, which I then had printed out on some fabric with spoon flour, and then I'll use that fabric to sew a bag lining for the inside of the trunk. This way, the original paper lining is preserved, but not really damaged as I use the trunk, but also when you lift the lid, the original aesthetic is also to a certain extent preserved. I figured it was a compromise, but a pretty good one. The fabric wasn't the only thing to come in the mail though, because I also got all the replacement hardware I'd ordered, and I set to work installing it. While you watch me give this trunk some much needed upgrades, I just wanted to take a moment to thank everybody for joining me in this process. Editing footage that was shot over 2 years ago really is an interesting and challenging experience, and I want to take a moment to thank everybody that has contributed to my channel. Everyone who watches my videos and leaves lovely comments, and especially a massive thank you to my monthly supporters, because I can literally see the effects of your contributions and the growth and improvements that it's allowed me to make. This video was shot on my smartphone, which meant that framing each shot was a lengthy and annoying process, and I now have a camera with a flip screen, so I can see what it is that I'm filming much easier and without having to run all over the place. I have a higher quality microphone that gives you better audio and allows me to spend less time in the editing process. It certainly makes my job easier and faster and helps me keep putting out videos for your entertainment. So thank you all so very much for the support. I really, really appreciate it. Now I know some of you will absolutely hate these final shots, and I know the aesthetic isn't for everyone. I mean, heck, it's not even my ideal result, and one day I'd love to do more research and find out how to add a touch of more historically accurate color back into this trunk, potentially in the form of linseed oil paint. But for the moment, I've at least gotten it to a place of much improvement, where these trunks are stable and preserved for years to come, and I can eventually get back to them later to keep working when I have the time, energy, and money to dedicate to further rehabilitating them. But for now, they're happily storing much of my fabric, and yes, I know that cedar is not actually going to provide much protection against the moths, but it's one of many steps I'm taking to keep my fabric safe and sound while I wait to use them. So let me know, do you have a trunk like this at home that's in need of some TLC? And if not, are you now inspired to maybe find one? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in my next video. Also, if you're a monthly survivor? If you're a monthly supporter, you have some bonus material over on Ko-fi or Patreon specific to this make. So be sure to head on over there and check it out. Oh my god. Wow, let's maybe try that one again.